Hi, my name is Liam. I don't like admitting this, but it's true. I remember a summer when I was 9. The house felt wrong, and nobody could explain why. It started with the attic. My parents used to keep things up there. Old furniture, Christmas decorations, boxes with my clothes. I was always warned never to go up alone because the stairs squeaked and the insulation made strange noises. Typical parent stuff. But one day, during a thunderstorm, the power went out and I heard scratching from above. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or a branch. Short pause. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed. The attic smelled like dust and mothballs. The beam of my flashlight cut through cobwebs, and there, half buried under a pile of quilts, was a doll. She looked older than anything I'd seen. Porcelain face, glass eyes that didn't reflect the light like normal eyes, hair still braided but damp with dust. Someone had painted a faint smile so thin it looked like a scar. I remember thinking she looked lonely. I should have left her there. Instead, I carried the doll downstairs and hid her under my bed. That night, I woke to a whisper, soft, like when someone tells a secret. I told myself it was the storm, but the next morning, the doll was sitting on my pillow, just inches from my face. I lived alone in that house with my parents. There was no way she could have been moved into my room without me seeing. I confronted my sister. "Stop being weird," she said. She hadn't touched my bed. My parents were puzzled. They brushed it off as a prank. But then things escalated. I'd find crumbs on the dresser, as if someone had been eating there. I'd wake to the sound of a rocking chair in the living room when there was no chair in motion. Toys I'd never owned would appear in places I'd never left them. Doors that were closed would be open, and every time I felt watched, like the eyes of that doll were tracking me through the house. I started hearing my name, whispered from empty rooms. It was not like a child's voice. It was dry, tired. Once, I saw a dark smear across the wall, like someone had dragged a hand through wet paint. When I touched it, the wall was cold and the smear felt dry. The doll always seemed closest to where the incidents happened, as if it were leading them. I begged my parents to throw the doll away. They laughed and told me to stop lying. The house looked normal to them. But to me, 3 nights of whispers and cold spots were more than a child's imagination. One night, at 2 a.m., I woke and found the doll sitting upright on the floor beside my bed, her head turned exactly toward me. The moonlight hit her eyes, and they seemed different. Empty, like small wells. I decided to prove I wasn't crazy. I took my dad's old camera and set it to take photos every 5 minutes overnight. Pause, I told myself. If something moves, I'll have evidence. I set the camera facing my bed and left the house to stay with a friend. When I came back in the morning, my parents were pale. The lens cap had been removed. The camera was on the floor. My room smelled of cold air. I slid the SD card into my computer and scrolled through the photos, with my heart pounding. For the first few shots, the room was empty. Then a frame at 3:12 a.m. The doll is on the floor, her arms limp. Next shot, 3:17 a.m. There's a blur, like someone turning. The next, 3:18 a.m. My bedroom door is open, a dark shape filling the doorway. I zoomed in. It looked like a person, wrapped in something dark, but twisted wrong. The final frame, 3:25 a.m., shows the doll on my pillow, directly under the frame where I had been sleeping. I burned the photos. I wanted to forget, but that night, I heard the whisper again, clearer, right by my ear. "Thank you," it said. The voice wasn't mine, but it felt like everything I held inside. That's when I realized the doll wasn't a toy. It seemed hungry for attention. My parents finally agreed to take the doll and throw it in the trash after I had a nightmare so vivid I woke up choking. They drove it to the dump 2 towns over and left it beside a heap of broken furniture. I thought it would end. It didn't. A week later, the doll was back on my bed. We moved. I begged my parents to leave the house. They said we couldn't afford it. But after another string of nights with scratches on my arms and the whispering following me in the aisles of the grocery store, they relented. We sold the house to a couple who wanted to renovate. Years later, as an adult, curiosity, or something worse, pulled me back to that town. I wasn't brave. I told myself I wanted closure. I needed to see if the doll had stayed behind, or if I'd finally outgrown the fear. The couple that bought the house had moved out a few months earlier. Their renovations stalled halfway through, leaving the place half empty and smelling of fresh paint and damp. I pushed open the screen door, and the house folded itself around me like a memory. The living room was bright, but my chest tightened the moment I stepped inside. I walked through the rooms until I reached the stairs to the attic. The new owners had left them unlocked. In the attic, among boxes labeled kitchen and Christmas, I found a small wooden crate with things they'd left behind. A stack of old photo albums, some children's drawings, and at the bottom, a faded Polaroid. I almost didn't look, but I did. The Polaroid was a family picture from decades ago. My childhood home in the background, a family in front of it. My stomach dropped because, standing on the porch in the picture, in the hands of a girl wearing a dress that looked older than anyone in our family had owned, was the doll. My throat closed. She was in the photo like she'd always been a part of the house. But it was the other photos in the album that froze me. Page after page, across 30 years, the doll appears again and again, in the corner of school pictures, half hidden behind a couch in a wedding photo, tucked under the arm of a toddler blowing out birthday candles. Every time, her smile is the same thin scar. I sat down on a dusty trunk and flipped through the album until I found a picture of our kitchen table from a year we moved out. On the table, barely visible, is a tiny porcelain hand, and then a picture of my sister at age 4, asleep on the couch with the doll propped on her chest. The album ended with a Polaroid labeled, in a cramped, unfamiliar handwriting, "Returned. Keep away." I shoved the album back into the crate and laughed, a sound that didn't reach my eyes. I told myself people collect old dolls, or keep antiques for nostalgia, but the whisper started at the edge of the attic, so quiet it was almost in my skull. I followed it down the stairs and into my old room. The bed had been replaced, but on the pillowcase there was a smear, a tiny crescent, like the shape of that thin smile. I left the house and went to the city dump on the edge of town. I wanted one last, irrational hope, that maybe I would find the doll and end it. I asked the workers about a porcelain doll taken in years before. They exchanged looks and told me people find weird things all the time. A man with a stained jacket pointed me toward a truck that kept bringing in old household trash from nearby antique stores. I walked among piles of discarded things until my foot struck something small and hard under a tarp. I pulled it free. She was the same dress, the same braided hair, the same painted smile. Her eyes, dull with grime, stared up at me. I should have dropped her and run, but I picked her up and felt a weight settle through my hand into my chest. The worker watching me asked if I wanted a burial. I said yes. I remember every detail. The heavy orange bag I tied around her, the cold wind, the sound of my nails scraping cardboard. I placed her into a pit with a dozen other things and covered it with dirt. I watched until the bulldozer leveled the mound and the toys vanishing beneath mud felt like a promise. That night, back at my apartment, I slept with the lights on and the curtains drawn. At 2:14 a.m., my phone lit with a notification, a photo from an unknown number. My heart stopped. The photo was grainy, a small hand, porcelain pale, laying flat on a pillow. In the shadow beside it, a child's face, eyes closed, mouth curled in a small piece. On the back of the child's wrist, clearly visible, with 4 faded scratches, the exact pattern of scars I had woken up with as a kid. I called every number I knew in that town. No one answered. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, but the next morning, a headline popped up on my feed. Local family's infant hospitalized after sudden collapse. Strange doll found nearby. The article said the couple who had lived in my old house had left town the week before the doll was discovered, and neighbors reported lullabies in the night. I drove back, found the hospital. The baby was fine now, wrapped in a blanket with tubes removed. The parents were pale and shaking. They told me they'd been renovating the attic and found the doll on the rafters. They thought it was an antique. When their infant stopped breathing, they only blamed themselves. But at the hospital, the nurse showed me a photo they'd taken the night their son collapsed. The doll on the crib, smiling. And in the corner of that hospital photo, on the shelf above the bed, I saw my own old camera, the same model I had used as a kid, sitting in a thrift sale pile at the dump. I left without saying a word. On the drive back, I couldn't shake the feeling of hands on my shoulders, like a small weight guiding me. That night, as I tried to sleep, a whisper slid between my ribs. "Thank you," it said. I realized, with an icy certainty, that this wasn't about dolls or houses. The smile wasn't painted by someone with a brush. It was something that found children, followed them, and when you thought you were getting rid of it, you were only moving it to the next place you loved. Hi, my name is Rosa. I never believed in ghosts. Not until I moved into apartment 4B and the music started. My building was old, thin walls, narrow stairs, the kind of elevator that smelled like pennies. On my first night, I heard a lullaby through the wall. Not loud, more like someone humming underwater. It was soothing, and it reminded me of my grandmother's house. I smiled and kept playing my video games. But the lullaby was always there after midnight, every night at the same time. At first, I thought it was the neighbor for C, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harlan, who had a cat and a walker. I knocked on her door and asked if she sang at night. She looked at me like I was joking. "At my age, dear, I'm lucky if I remember dinner," she said and laughed. But later she called the landlord and complained about that singing through the walls. He shrugged, said he'd asked people to keep it down. The lullaby kept coming. One night, I set up my phone to record the sound. I placed it against the wall and left it running. In the morning, I listened with my coffee in hand. The file was mostly static, but at 1:07 a.m. there was a clear voice humming. It was the lullaby, but beneath it, like an echo, something else, words spoken too softly to make out. I enhanced the audio and played it again. The words were in my own voice, but older, like the way my mother speaks when she thinks no one is watching. I sat in my car outside later and watched the lit windows of 4C and 4B. I started talking to other neighbors, an anxious grad student, a couple that worked nights. None of them could hear the lullaby through their walls. It was only me, only in my apartment. That should have been a relief, but it made it worse. A week later, Mrs. Harlan vanished. Her mail piled up, the cat went unfed, and the landlord said she had gone to stay with a cousin out of state. Police left without much interest. I felt sick. The lullaby changed after she left, slower now, time stretching between notes, and instead of soft humming, there were little taps against my bedroom wall like fingertips tracing a rhythm. I started keeping a notebook. Each night I wrote what I heard. The taps became knocks. The knocks turned into the sound of nursery rhymes picked apart and reassembled in wrong ways. My sleep became a fragile thin thing. Once I woke at 3 a.m. to find the bedroom door open and a soft, pale handprint on the inside of the bedroom doorframe, about the size of a child's. I pressed my thumb against it and felt warm oil. I scrubbed it away because I couldn't let anyone see it, and think I was insane. I took my baby monitor from my sister's old crib and set it in my living room, directed at the hallway. At 2:12 a.m., the monitor crackled. I heard the lullaby, and a child's small breath. Then the door in 4C creak open. The monitor's camera showed an empty hallway, but the audio picked up a voice again, my voice whispering, "Sure, it's okay." I vomited on my kitchen tiles and sat there until the sun came up. The landlord finally replaced the locks in 4C after tenants complained about other noises. He found the apartment empty, but on the bed, pressed into the duvet like a print, was an old stuffed rabbit with a piece of tape across one ear. The rabbit clutched a note, illegible at first, until the landlord turned it over and read aloud, trembling, "Do not follow the lullaby." He called me and asked if I knew what that meant. I lied and said no. I moved my bed against the opposite wall and began sleeping with the radio on. The lullaby adapted. It slipped under the music like a low hum. One night, in the static between stations, I heard a melody I knew from my childhood. It was a phrase my mother used to sing to me when I was little, words she had said only to me. I called my mother and asked if she had been singing to me from a phone or a call. She cried and said she was in Mexico, 2 time zones away, and hadn't sung in years. The next morning, there was a package on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape and a note, typewritten play. I almost threw it away. I didn't. I put in my old player and pressed play. There was static for a second, then a recording of a child's laughter, thin and high, layered under that same lullaby. Then, plain as day, my voice again, saying, "Don't open the door. He sings for them." My hand shook so badly I dropped the cassette. I called the landlord and told him to check in on Unit 4D across the hall. When he went, he found toys arranged in a circle on the floor and, in the center, a photo of me asleep on my couch. The landlord called the police. The report said someone had been squatting in 4D. Photos of me were scattered, and scribbles on the wall said, "She remembers the lullaby." They trapped whatever had been in 4D. They boarded up that apartment, and I thought the noise would stop. For a while it did. I almost fell back into a life that resembled normal. I left the building for a job interview, and on the train, I listened to music and tried to breathe. The lullaby returned not as sound but as a taste. At lunch, it was in the air, like sugar and iron. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered out of habit. I heard my mother on the line, her voice far away. She said calmly, "He sings tonight, Rosa. Listen." Then the line went dead. The rest of the day I sat in a silence that felt like waiting for a storm to break. That night, I placed a recorder on my pillow and lay awake, pretending to be asleep. At 1:02 a.m., the lullaby started under the building hum, close enough to feel cold on my cheek. A shadow crossed the ceiling. In the glow of the tiny bedside lamp, I saw the outline of a hand descend and press down on my pillow, and as pressure pushed my head to the mattress, my own voice whispered, "Sleep." I woke up hours later with bruises on my shoulders and a photo face down on my kitchen counter. When I flipped it over, it was of a child newborn, eyes closed, held in my arms. Written on the back in shaky ink were words I knew I hadn't written. "For when the lullaby comes, feed him." I don't know how long they watched me, how many times I was asleep and someone else sang my voice over me to lull a child of the building. I moved out 2 days later and never looked back. I quit my job and moved across the country. I try never to sleep with the windows open. I hate children's music on the radio. But sometimes, in apartments with thin walls, I hear a stray hum through the pipes, a phrase of a lullaby that my mother sang, and it curls up under my skin like something that knows my name. 1 week after I left, my sister sent me a video. She'd been cleaning out family boxes and found a tape labeled Rosa 2 a.m. She pressed play. In the grainy footage, a sleeping me in my old apartment, shoulders rising and falling, and in the doorway behind me, a figure, shapeless, bending, cradling something small. The figure looked down, and the camera caught the motion of a song humming through lips that were not mine. Then, the figure turned, and for half a second, I saw its face in the flicker of the camera, a pale, empty face with my eyes in it. If you like these stories, remember to check the corners of your room tonight and listen for lullabies you don't remember learning. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to be careful with what you leave in attics, who sings through your walls, and what presses at your ceiling when you're sleeping. Some things don't go away when you move. They follow the places you love.